Welcome to the tutorial on JavaScript Promise Object. Many times we want to execute jobs which take more time than usual. For example, a network call or a database operation. We can execute those jobs using the Promise object provided by JavaScript. Let us see why to use Promise, what is the problem that we are trying to solve. Let us start by declaring a dummy function which takes some time to execute. We do a sample operation of addition, but to mimic the time consuming part, we will use the setTimeout method. Now let us call our job in our main function. We will first print the start value of the result, then we will call the job function, and finally print the result again. Take a look at the result. We got before and after print statements prior to job complete, and result value is also 0 in both the cases. Whereas we wanted the result to be 30 after the job was called. Our job took a time of a second. Result got print before the addition. How do we solve this problem? JavaScript Promise helps in this case. In next tutorial, let us see how to solve this problem using the Promise object. Welcome to the next tutorial for JavaScript Promise object. Earlier we saw the problem with a job function that wasn't executing at a point where we wanted it to execute. That kind of function can be considered as an asynchronous function. In this tutorial, we will take a look at how to execute asynchronous function using the promise object. We will continue to use earlier job function code and convert the function to return promise. The promise will execute the set timeout code asynchronously, and once the execution is complete, we will call resolve to mark execution is complete without any problem. Resolve is called only when the job is executed normally. Reject is called when there is an invalid condition or abnormal execution. We will cover reject in later error handling tutorial. We need to mark the main method as async because await expression can only be used in async function, otherwise you will get syntax error. Now let us run the code. Look at the output. We have the job executed prior to the after result is print. So this has solved our problem. Important things to remember. We are returning promise in job function. As soon as job completes in promise callback, we call to resolve. We have marked main as async and return await expression prior to job function call. This is about promise in async function. But how we do promise execution without async function and await expression? We will remove await prior job function call. We call then callback on promise returned by job function. As soon as promise calls resolve, next then callback will be invoked. In this callback, we can print our result as at this point the job is complete. We can return data to then, but we will see that in later tutorial. As we have removed await expression, we can remove async from the main method definition. Let us run our code. Result will be same as before. This is how you run asynchronous job using promise object. You can choose to use await or then callback based on your need. We will see how error handling is done with Promise in next tutorial.
In this tutorial, let us see how to handle error in Promise and pass data using resolve and reject. We are going to reuse earlier example and modify job function to take numbers as argument. In resolve, we'll pass addition as argument. Now let us call job function with some numerical values and see the result. This will be a normal run. So with normal run, we got output as 30. But what if we pass some invalid values like a boolean? So surely job function is going to throw an error. Let us guard our promise with conditions which will make sure that whatever arguments we pass are numbers. If passed arguments are not numbers, we'll simply throw an error in reject callback saying only numbers can be added. Now if we run the program, we'll get an error saying only numbers are supported for the second job call that we have added. To guard our second callback for invalid argument, we will add a catch block after then, which will catch the only numbers supported error which is thrown by our promise. When we run the program, the output is 30 for valid arguments, and for invalid boolean argument, it shows that operation failed. Only numbers are supported. With both the resolve and reject callbacks, we can send complex objects. Whatever we pass in resolve as data will be delivered to then callback, and whatever we pass to reject will be delivered to catch callback. For valid data in then callback, we'll print data.result and data.message, which will be value of addition, and data.message will be success. For invalid arguments in catch block, we'll print result data.result and data.message. So in data.result, we'll have an error. Within that error, we'll have a message. In summary, we can say that in Promise, wherever we encounter an invalid condition, we deliver the error to reject callback, or we call reject. If execution was normal and we do it completely, then we can mark it as resolved, or if there is any resultant data, we can pass that to resolve. Both the resolve and reject callback support passing data, and mostly in resolve we'll get the final result. In promise execution, we call reject when we met an invalid condition or a error needs to be thrown, and the reject will deliver the data to catch callback for the promise. In next tutorial, we'll look into all method of promise object. Thank you. In this tutorial, we will look into all method of promise object, how you can execute multiple promise at a time and wait all of them to complete to get the results. Let us use the existing example and modify it to define few promises. We have defined three different promises. Now let us call our all method on promise object and pass all these three promises at a time. Promise.all returns a main promise which resolves only when all of the promises passed to it execute successfully, and in then callback we get array of results for each of the promises. Order of the result is in the same sequence that we have passed the promises to all method. Promise.all works only when all of the past promises resolve. If a single promise gets rejected, a catch callback will be invoked on the main promise that was written by all, irrespective of the results of other promises. As JavaScript is not strictly typed, in results array you can pass any kind of result. Let us try and pass a number to one of the promises. Important thing to remember about Promise.all is you never know in what order promises will get executed and whether they will execute concurrently, parallelly, or sequentially. As per documentation, it depends on the machine on which that code gets executed. All method of promise object should only be used when the past promises are independent of each other. For the case where we want to check each promise's result, whether it rejects or resolves, in next tutorial we are going to look into all settled method of promise object, which handles rejected promises as well as resolved promises and pass the execution status at the end of execution. Hope you will see the next tutorial. Thanks for watching this tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going to look into all settled method of promise object to execute multiple promises even if some of them fails with reject and some of them do normal execution with resolve. All of the promises once complete execution, then a final result is given to then callback with status of promise if it's fulfilled or rejected, and if it's fulfilled, then a value is returned, and if it is rejected, then reason for rejection is returned. In the code of previous tutorial, let's modify all method to all settled, and let us make one of the promise to reject with a string value which will be reason for the rejection. Once all of the past promises are settled, we'll get result in an array similar to all methods callback. But in this case, we get a output object which contains a value and status of the promise. In case of rejection, we get reason. As we get result in both the cases if a promise is resolved or it's rejected, hence the catch block here becomes irrelevant. In case of third promise, we have got value as undefined because the third promise was rejected. We get a reason in that case. So let us modify our code to print reason. Thank you for watching this tutorial. In next tutorial, we will look into promise object's race method, which resolves the first promise which gets executed out of all the past promises. In this tutorial, we will look into promise object's race method, which returns result for the promise which completes execution before any other promises pass to race method. To understand the execution of race method, let us define two promises, one of which will execute fast, whereas the other will execute slowly. We will give programmatic time delays to both the promises using setTimeout method. Unlike the all and all settled method, in this particular case, race method returns only a single value, which is result of the promise which executed first than the other promises. Thank you for watching this tutorial. In next tutorial, we will look into finally method of promise object. In this tutorial, we will look into finally method of promise object. Finally method runs every time irrespective of the result of the promise. So even if a promise is rejected or resolved, finally method will be called at the end. Let us define two promises, one of which will resolve normally, whereas the other one will reject.
Now let us call both the promises that we have defined, and we will call then, catch, and finally methods in sequence. The resolved promise will invoke then callback, whereas the promise which got rejected will call catch block. But both the promise will run finally block at the end. As you can see in the output, we have got finally block executed for both the promises, even if one of them was resolving and the other one was rejecting. That's all. This was the final tutorial on Promise Object of JavaScript. Thank you for watching all the tutorials. If you have not already watched, please watch. We have explained different uses of promise and the methods of promise object of JavaScript. For example, all settled, race method, finally method of promise object. We have also seen when to call resolve and reject callback and how to pass data from those, and then callback, catch callback for error handling. Thank you for watching. Have a good time.